cool anymore, but it's this term, and you can see it on the slide, thirsty. Now, because I'm not that cool, I know the youth kids are like, what? Anyways, but because I'm not that cool and usually kind of late to everything, as most parents are these days, especially with how fast things change and evolve with popular culture these days, as it is with most things, thirsty, I was a bit late to the party, as they say. Now, the original term or the original meaning of the word and why it became popular was used to describe somebody who really wanted to date someone. And often not even a specific someone, but just anyone for that matter. And so a thirsty guy or a girl was one that was just constantly seeking and wanting to be in a relationship or have relational encounters so much that it made other people around them feel really awkward and really weird. And unfortunately, as it is with much of today's slang, there was also an underbelly that we won't talk about, but this is kind of the general meaning of the word. Now, by the time I began to realize this was something that I should learn, I did what every old parent would do. I Googled it. And the term, by the time I had Googled it, I learned had evolved a bit, but the evolving of it, as it were, caught my attention even more than the original. Because here's how a New York Times article defined it if you click over. Thirsty is a graceless need for approval, affection, or attention. One so raw that it creeps people out. It calls to mind the panting tongues, the bulging eyeballs, springing hearts, and steam-shooting ears of Looney Tunes characters. So while this term began as a need for the attention and affection of one's relational interests, it quickly kind of evolved into a general sense of describing someone who had such a desperate need for attention, external approval and validation, so much that they would throw away all sense of self-respect, that they would end up looking like this if you click over. And this is obviously not a good thing. This was how they looked all the time. Now, if you know who I am, the moment I get kind of caught into this, I was officially down a rabbit hole, digging deeper into this cultural phenomenon known as thirst. And here's what I found as I dug, okay? Well, first, while the term thirsty might be new and hip to some degree, I found out that the idea behind this term is as old as humanity, actually. It's often what we describe in today's world as the, as you'll see, disease of more, or where enough is never quite enough. The disease of more actually is a term that was coined by Pat Riley, who is a famous NBA player, coach, and GM and president of a team. And he coined this term because basically he said, the reason why most teams that should win championships, and multiple of them either don't win any or don't only win one and can never repeat, is because this disease of more will creep in. That more than the sole pursuit of winning a championship, which requires sacrifice, teamwork, right? Putting the goal of the team over the goal of the self, especially after a team wins a championship, he said other desires, the more, started to creep in, as in more playing time, more money, more endorsements, more accolades, more recognition for the role that they played in winning, more. And he said once this desire for more creeps in, he says, well, it ruins everything because the purpose, the goal, right? The reason for playing the game in the first place has been lost to this disease of more, ruining what could have been and should have been many, many championships, in his opinion. Now, I think you can see that this doesn't just apply to sports, it applies to the general public, and even more so, perhaps. So as I dug, then I found this. There was an online psychology article, and it described this phenomenon really well. The author describes meeting this dude, probably in some big city like New York. And this dude had it all, this guy. He had a massively successful business, an awesome lifestyle that we would all be jealous of, a very happy and good relationship, a great support system, and a network of friends and family. Like, he had everything. And so he met this guy, and they were talking. And apparently this guy said to the psychology author and said, I think I need to hire me a coach to help me get to the next level. And so then the psychologist asked him, what is this next elusive level that you're talking about? And the underlying assumption as he asked this question is, dude, you have everything. What more could you possibly need that you don't already have? And to that question, the guy replied like this. He goes, actually, I'm not really sure. And that's the very reason why I need to hire somebody to help me find out what I'm missing. Behind it, what he said was basically, I don't know what I'm missing, but all I know is that I am indeed missing something and I need someone to help me get it. And so he finished this conversation apparently by saying, I just feel like I need to always be improving myself no matter what. The disease of more, where enough is never enough. Now I mention all this to you because most interestingly, in the first century during Jesus' time, the philosophers of the day, the religious elite, and so on and so forth during his time, they had a word to describe this phenomenon as well. And it's, as you see, it's called dropsy. Dropsy is actually a medical term, which we'll get into a little bit later, but in this time, during Jesus' time, they would use this term to describe people who were, quote, lovers of money, for those who craved and had an insatiable greed for recognition and status. So I'm mentioning all this to you because we read it in our parable, didn't we? Here's Jesus at a dinner party with a leader of the Pharisees in the presence of a man with physical medical dropsy, and yet Jesus scandalously deals with the cultural, the emotional, the relational, or may I put it best, spiritual dropsy of everyone at the party, and therefore all of us. I'm telling you all this because while Jesus heals the man with physical dropsy, which is pretty crazy enough on its own, as we'll see through this parable, what Jesus is trying to do is heal the deep spiritual dropsy of the world. A spiritual dropsy so deep that if left uncured, the Bible seems to suggest that we, who are not cured of it, will not enter the kingdom of God. So today, through this parable, I'm inviting you to a dinner party, asking all of us, are we willing to allow Jesus to diagnose us of our dropsy and therefore provide the healing that we desperately need, but unfortunately don't even think we need? I hope the answer is a sincere yes. So let's set the scene first, because the scene is critical. If you click over, we're told in verse 1 through 2 that Jesus is at the house of a leader of the Pharisees on the Sabbath with a man suffering from dropsy. Now, right off the bat, as you read this first verse, Luke is describing a situation that is just overflowing with tension and drama, right? You can almost hear the music in the background. It's like that kind of music. And here's why. Well, first, we find out that Jesus is at the house of a leader of the Pharisees. This is important because by this time in Luke and in Jesus' ministry, the Pharisees hated Jesus a lot. Their hatred was deep and explosive. Their desire to get rid of Jesus was full-blown. They saw him as a real threat to their faith, and they wanted to get him out. They wanted to get rid of him, and this was known publicly. The second thing we must note is that we're told that this happens on the Sabbath, which should already let us know that something's about to go down. Because if you read through Jesus' ministry, much, if not all, of the religious elites, right, the Pharisees and such, their issue with Jesus almost always seems to center around the Sabbath. So when you hear Jesus, Sabbath, and the Pharisees, that's a mixture for a bomb about to explode. And then the third is that we're told that there's a man with dropsy in the home at the dinner party, which immediately to anyone in those days would have been immediately suspicious, because dropsy was a medical illness of the time that was considered unclean, which means that there's absolutely no way, unless something real fishy was going on, that a Pharisee, let alone the leader of the Pharisees, would ever let anyone unclean like this in his home, especially on the Sabbath in the presence of a rabbi. Not happening. So, all this begs the question, what's going on here, right? As in, why is Jesus at this home? And how in the world did that man with dropsy get into this house? And let me make sure, he didn't get in by sneaking in. That wouldn't have happened. Someone let him in, and we got to figure out why. Well, if you click over to the next slide, notice what Luke tells us. He says they were watching him, Jesus, very closely. Scholars have said that there's probably two reasons why Jesus was at this house. Back in those days, there was a cultural thing where, actually, it's very true of even today, where if a rabbi was visiting your town, then the cultural thing to do was to invite him over to your home, if you were one of the Pharisees, a particular leader, and treat him to a meal. It's like I get treated to meals, senior pastors get treated to meals. It's very common in that way. Secondly, Jesus was probably at that house, people think, because he may have taught at the synagogue because it's Sabbath, right? And so even more, if a visiting rabbi teaches in your synagogue on the Sabbath day, then even more the regular thing and the cultural thing to do was to invite him over to your home. And in this section of Luke, Jesus is squarely in the middle of what's called the Jerusalem journey, right? He's on his way to Jerusalem. So he's visiting for a little while. All the things happen. And indeed, that's why people say that he's there. Now, all of this isn't untrue. It is true. But the thing that kind of jumps out at you, or at least should, is none of this explains what in the world the man with dropsy is doing at this party. Nor does it explain why Luke makes sure that we hear that they were watching him closely. And so what we find out, if you dig deeper, is what's most likely happening is that the Pharisees, who already told you want Jesus gone, well, they've set Jesus up in a trap. They're going, Jesus, what you gonna do with this man with dropsy on the Sabbath in my house? And based on what he did, they were planning on or trying to get rid of him right then and there. Now, if you click over a quick word on the Sabbath. Now, you must know that Sabbath was originally created by God for wholeness, rest, and worship. As in, through worship and rest, we become whole again with God. But the Pharisees, by this point, had turned, Sabbath into a way to simply exclude people they wanted to and then include the people that they wanted to, aka the faithful versus the not faithful. And they did this via the Sabbath rules, related to what was considered work and not work. Let me give you one example. It was considered work if anyone lit a fire on the Sabbath, okay? So you weren't allowed to light fires. You had to figure out something else if you needed warmth or to cook your food or whatever the case might be. Now, this is so serious. I don't know if you know this, but Orthodox Jews of today, did you know on Sabbath they don't drive a car? Do you know why? Because when you stick your key into the ignition and you turn the key inside the engine, the spark plug creates a spark and then that thing turns the engine on. So quite literally by turning a key, they just lit a fire. And so Orthodox Jews, strict Orthodox Jews, still to this day will not drive their car on the Sabbath. They got to get somebody else to turn the car on and drive them around, aka bus or whatever the case might be. So, like it, another one of the major Sabbath rules of the day was, unfortunately for doctors, and I'm sure the doctors will cringe in this room, you cannot do the work of healing on the Sabbath. That was forbidden. It was work. So if you put that all together, well, here's this man with dropsy in front of Jesus, which we'll find out is a serious condition, on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees want to know, Jesus, what are you going to do? Are you going to do what you normally do, which is to love this man and heal this man, which we know you do, or are you going to break the Sabbath rule and give us every reason to get you? Well, as we read, Jesus definitely heals, for again, that's what Sabbath is for, wholeness, to make whole that which wasn't whole. But more, as he does, Jesus then realizes this is a great opportunity to speak this parable. Because at his heart, more than the man with physical dropsy, what he wanted to show them is y'all are suffering from a worse case of dropsy. And I'm going to try to heal that. Why? Because again, Sabbath is all about wholeness. But the sad part is y'all don't even know you're suffering from it. Well, let me tell you a little bit about what dropsy is so we can kind of begin to understand what Jesus is getting at. If you click over to the next slide, dropsy is actually a medical condition that's also known as edema. It's got many different forms, but as you can see on the screen, generally involves what's an abnormal buildup of fluid, either right below your skin or in small cavities of your body. So much so that it causes immense painful swelling in different areas of your body. As you can see in the picture, the swelling is so bad that if you took a finger and kind of poked, the indent stays because the swelling is so crazy. It's almost like your legs or your arms become like Play-Doh or whatever. It's crazy. But even worse, perhaps, than that, if you can imagine, one of the worst symptoms and ironic symptoms of dropsy is that it also causes unquenchable thirst, which I think you can see the irony, right? You struggle from a disease in which you retain too much fluid, so much so that it causes buildup and painful swelling, and yet all you want to do is to drink more fluid to cause more swelling. Dropsy, for our purposes, is a disease where the very thing that's causing you hurt and pain, The threat to your body is the thing that you want more and more with an unquenchable thirst. Talk about the disease of more, where enough is never quite enough. So then what Jesus realizes is that the people in the room, more than the man with physical dropsy, are suffering from a condition serious enough where he says, I got to do something about this. But here's the really interesting part. Because it was a dinner party on the Sabbath, what it meant is actually Jesus could have waited a few hours to heal the man, therefore not get in any trouble with the Pharisees, and then try to do something about it later. He could have completely avoided falling into the trap, as it were. But as we know, Jesus doesn't do this. And so then we must ask why. Why doesn't Jesus wait? Why not make it easier for himself? Why bring all that negative attention and PR and essentially make the Pharisees want to kill him even more? Well, it's because the thing that Jesus was really about, the massive obstacle in the room that got his attention, wasn't the physical dropsy. You see, this is Jesus, and we should know this by now. He can heal the dropsy easy. And he does. Because he's God, we'll call it easy. But what he recognized was a big obstacle in the room wasn't the physical dropsy, but it was the spiritual dropsy that was all over the room, all over the world. And Jesus really wanted to get at it. And the only way to do so was to rile them up about the physical dropsy, the instigator, if you will, grab their attention, and then speak a parable that he had their attention because they thought they got him, and then reveal the thing that he's all about, which is, at the end, you'll see a radical and scandalous love because he is God. So let's get to the main event, shall we? Jesus dealing with the spiritual dropsy. Well, right off the bat, Jesus knows exactly what's going on because he's Jesus. He realizes, oh man, I'm being set up. He noticed that they're watching him closely, and even though they don't say nothing, he hears the message, and therefore he, as Luke tells us, as you see on the screen, he answers them. But he answers them as he generally likes to do by asking them a question. He goes, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Now, the answer to the Pharisees, as we've talked about, the answer is no. But to God, it's yes, again, because the original intention of Sabbath is to heal and make whole. And so the Pharisees keep quiet, as they would, because they don't want to get themselves in trouble. They want to see what Jesus is about to do, so they stay silent. Then Jesus goes on to heal the man, which is big no-no. They're all getting riled up. And then he asks them another question, and this makes them shut up right away. And he goes, which of you, if you click over, if you had a son or an ox fall into a well, wouldn't put him out on the Sabbath? And of course, the answer to everyone is none of us would. All of us, if our own son or our own ox falls into a deep, deep well that they can't rescue themselves out of, we would definitively, without question, Sabbath or not, pull them out. And of course, the reason is pretty clear. Why? Because that's what you do to people that matter to you, right? The people precious to you, of course you're going to go save them. You're not going to wait. No one had time for that. But are you seeing what Jesus is trying to say? And again, we're going to keep getting at this message. What Jesus is saying is, what you don't recognize, and the thing that I'm trying to do that you hate me for, is that you have fallen into a well, and because I love you and you're precious to me, even though you hate me, I'm trying to get you out. You see? But to this, they don't answer because they don't quite see it yet, which is then why Jesus begins to speak the parable, if you click over. And so he speaks two parables, one to the guests at the party and one to the host, targeting the same issue, which is their unrecognized and therefore undiagnosed spiritual dropsy, which I'm suggesting all of us are also suffering from to some degree. Now, at the heart of both parables is the guest's desire and the host's desire simply for, as we talked about, more status, more recognition, more approval, and more validation, which is a very important thing in their culture, and I hope you would agree is important in our culture and has always been through almost every culture. So to the guest, Jesus then says, hey, you know, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, don't take the place of honor, but rather take a lower seat, so that they might move you up. Because if you take a higher seat, you might get embarrassed in front of everyone, but rather sit in a further seat, right? A less distinguished seat, so that they move you up. Now here's why this is important. If you click over, in those days, as it is with many weddings today, the reception hall is actually a very telling thing. You can kind of tell a lot about a wedding when you go to the reception hall. Now, if you look in the picture in the back, the little love seat, that's where the bride and the groom will sit, in this picture anyway. The long table there is usually where you'll have the bridal party, the groomsmen and the maid of honors and whatever, right? So this one is a pretty big group, as you can see. That first table closest to the love seat is probably where one set of parents is going to sit and their immediate family, and then so on and so forth. So that's kind of how the whole thing is arranged at a wedding. And I've been to many of them, and that's generally how it goes. And you can immediately tell, the closer to the bride and groom you sit, the more close you are or more important you are to them in many ways. And so while the fact remains that the fact that you're at the wedding in the first place means that you're very close and important to them, where you sit indicates quite a lot. Now, the important difference you need to know about today and then is this. In today's day, the bride and the groom will determine where you sit. You'll walk in, if you've ever been to a wedding, to a reception hall, and then they'll have a long list of names. You got to find your name at a table and then go find it. So they dictate where you sit. It's their choice. But interestingly, back in those days, that didn't happen. You could sit wherever you please at any of these dinner wedding feasts. So if you got there early enough and all the seats were open, you could plunk yourself down wherever you thought that you belonged in that group. Now, as you can probably tell, depending on how you chose and what you thought of yourself, this could go either really well or really poorly. Because you could be like, oh yeah, I know so-and-so, like they tight, we good, so then you go sit like right real close. And then what's going to end up happening if this goes bad for you is that as the guests fill in and yada, 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 someone really important is going to show up. And then the bride and the groom or the host are going to be like, wait, no, you can't sit over there. So they look, and they look, and they go, oh, you're in the wrong seat. So sorry, can you get up? Because you don't belong there. Can you move? Now, if that happened to you in a public setting with everyone there, that's really embarrassing, right? That's not a good look. So Jesus says, rather than doing that, sit lower. And then as that's happening, the opposite might come true. Jesus might be like, or the host might be like, hey, you know what? You're so much closer to me than you think. Move up a little. And of course, that would be honoring. But at the heart of it all, what Jesus is pointing out is something simple. The main thing here is how we or you or us see ourselves in the eyes of the host, isn't it? And so to drive home the point, then Jesus tells the next parable, which not only clarifies, but really gets at it. If you click over, he then says, when you host a party, don't invite your friends or your brothers, your rich neighbors, or rather invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Now, to be clear, let me just tell you, Jesus is not telling you that you can't hang out with your friends or have your family over. That's not what he's saying. Sometimes Jesus likes to make statements, like emphasize, right? Later in the chapter, in chapter 14, he basically says, like, if you love your father, if you don't hate your father and mother, you can't follow me. He's not saying hate your parents. He's saying you can certainly love them, but you have to love me more. So in this case, he's saying you can certainly have, your friends over and your family over and so on and so forth, but you need to know what gospel hospitality and love is really like. And that's what he's trying to say. So let me explain a little bit further if you click. In those days, the culture was a very hierarchical, status-driven society, much more than today. So much so they called it a patronage society. And the idea is, and the idea is actually not all that different from today, unfortunately, but the idea in those societies is that the only way you're going to progress in life isn't actually by working hard. That doesn't get you anywhere in those days most of the time. The only way to get anywhere in life and get further up and progress is through the people you knew and what the people you knew were able to hook you up with. And basically what society is, who you know is everything. And so whenever you had a chance to host a dinner party, here's what you would do. Yes, you would invite your friends, of course, and your family. But most importantly, you would pick out purposely very important guests, patrons, who you would hope would then become a part of your inner circle. And then what would happen, if things worked out well, was that because you invited Mr. Important to your party, they would invite you to their party when they hosted one. And because you were included as Mr. Important in their party, you would then gain Mr. Important as your patron, but also at their party be introduced to Mrs. Valuable and Mr. Wealthy as well. And so through these invitations and whatnot, you would be able to not only establish your standing in life, but continually progress forward based on who you got to know. And as you can probably tell with this system, well then, inviting the poor, the lame, the crippled, and the blind, well that doesn't get you nowhere. There's no point because they were social outcasts. They can't get you anywhere. They have no connections. And so therefore, since they can't help you, you wouldn't invite them because, well, you don't. And they wouldn't invite you one either because they don't even have the means to host one. So what would happen in society is that the poor would become more poor, the marginalized become more marginalized, and so on and so forth, permanently excluded. Now, if you understand all this, a lot of info, then you got to see what Jesus is doing. At a dinner party in which he was invited as a guest, trying to be set up, not only does he heal on the Sabbath, which brings hostility his way, as we talked about, but he also speaks a parable so scandalous and radical to everyone there. And what he's trying to say is, y'all don't understand. You think that this man with the dropsy is the one suffering, but no, y'all have dropsy way worse than him, which of course only further gets Jesus into deeper waters with the Pharisees. But let's dig a little deeper to really uncover the issue that Jesus is getting at. I think when you read this parable, at first, you may kind of think of Jesus as like your parent or some boss or whatever, right? Where Jesus seems to be laying it on thick, the criticism to the Pharisees, right? Saying, how dare you, right? You're supposed to be my spiritual leaders. You're supposed to be the people who are spiritually mature and loving people, and yet here you are totally outcasting, totally shunning, further marginalizing the very people I came to save, the people who need hospitality most, the poor and the marginalized. It's very easy, if you look at it a certain way, where you might hear Jesus saying like, hey, you need to shape up. Stop being a fool. Stop caring about yourself and care about others. Now, I think that's a part of Jesus' message, but I don't think that's the message, if you catch my drift. Because what Jesus is trying to do is actually something totally different. He's actually trying to show them how much he cares and how much grace he wants to give to them and everyone who's there. To Jesus, the dropsy that was impacting the people there was their deep need or the imprisonment that they were under of getting their self-worth from other human beings. Do you relate? The Pharisees and everyone there had deeply tied themselves in this cycle where their self-worth, their identity, was completely and utterly dependent on who they knew and what those they knew thought of them, and worse, who better they could get to know to only grow their status. Again, do you relate? Do you remember when Jesus again asked them who wouldn't rescue their own son, an ox, from the well? Again, he's saying, don't you see, you've fallen in. The only way you feel worthy of anything in life is to have someone else validate your status. Which means the only way you'll ever get to feel good about yourself, worthy of anything, is to keep getting validation of someone greater and greater and greater and greater. And I think we would all agree, if that's really the cycle or the disease that you're a part of, that road and cycle, well, that cycle never ends, church, doesn't it? The disease of more, where enough is never enough, runs most rampant in these circles, at these parties. Because not only is Jesus teaching us this, but I think we could all agree, we can look at the world and know that once our self-worth gets hooked onto what others think of us, once it gets hooked on to being known for who you were seen with last, at whose dinner party you got invited to, or who followed you, or who reposted you, who liked your post, who commented on your post, so on and so forth, which is everything that's important to the world in these days, well, that thirst never ends, ever. It's unquenchable. Indeed, the ones Jesus is trying to say who are suffering from a greater and more dangerous dropsy, where the thing that you think, the thing that's ruining you is the thing that you want more and more, yet you don't realize it, is everyone at the party, and by connection, all of us. But again, let's not make the mistake of thinking that Jesus is shaking his head at us and pointing his finger and doing this because he's just pointing. That's not what Jesus is doing. Why? Because what we feel and what we should know is that his heart is exploding with care and concern. And how do we know? Well, because in the end, what he says in the parable, is it not just a massive invitation to all of us? Because what Jesus is saying is, don't you recognize that I'm at your party? I, the I am, the God who made everything, God himself, I am at your party. Which means if I am at your party, then I'm the most important thing. And if you're at the party with me, the one who speaks the world into being, the one who is killed, right? But then kills death by death, dying on a cross and then resurrecting and then promising us resurrected life. If I'm at your party, then what does that say about you who are at the party? For those of you who are indeed then my guests, well, in the end, the party that you want to be at, that everyone wants to be at, is the party that you indeed you're at. the eternal one that won't end, that cannot end, that can never fail, where the host is not only the one you love, but the one who loves you, but also is God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then he says the most shocking thing of all. He goes, and do you know how you get invited to this party? In the world you live in, you have to be of something. You have to know someone. You have to matter to someone. You have to have something to bring to the table, as I say, to be invited. But in my dinner party, you get invited not by exalting yourself, but rather humbling yourself. Further, he says, those who exalt themselves will be humbled, but those who humble themselves will be exalted. In this case, the one who's doing the exalting and the humbling isn't some social or relational or religious elite, but God himself. He says, you get an invitation by doing what I have always done, inviting poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. But he's also saying, and do you know if you're suffering from dropsy? You know you're suffering from dropsy if that type of action is insulting to you. Because what you don't recognize is that you and we're the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind that Jesus has come to save and invite to the party, isn't it? But more, I think what Jesus is trying to say is this. Why do you feel as if you don't have enough and therefore need more? When I'm with you, he's saying, there are no choice seats. There are no best seats. Why? All of the best seats. Because I'm the only one that can sit with everyone. I'm the one who is with everyone. Including you, yes, money-loving, status-craving, graceless, validation seekers, thirsty ones like you. Interestingly, in the same article I mentioned earlier where the author meets that really uber successful dude who thought he was missing something, well, then he mentions this study that psychologists have long gone to. Psychologists have studied the thing that makes people happy for quite some time now. And in this one particular study, a long-term study where they took a whole bunch of people and just continually asked them, hey, how happy are you? How happy are you? All throughout their life, and then kind of saw the patterns. Well, here's what they found. What they found, surprisingly, was that most people throughout most of their lives, apparently they say the same thing. They're always the same thing. On a scale of 1 to 10, when asked to rate their happiness, they always, most likely, will say, I'm a 7 on a scale of 10. Yes, there are times where, suffering and disasters and tragedy and whatnot, where the number will come down to a 1, 2, or 3. And other times when, amazing things happen, like people get married or get promoted, win the lottery, whatever, and then that'll go up to an 8 or a 9. But in the end, everyone comes back down to a 7. Not fully unhappy, but also not fully happy. The psychologist says most human beings live in a constant state of mild but not fully satisfying happiness, which is, I think, one of the most depressing things I've ever read. Things are almost always fine, but they also can always be better. Now, on one hand, I think if you look at it, you might be like, well, actually, isn't that kind of good, Pastor Pete? That means most people in the world, they kind of live fairly happy, mostly happy. But they know there's more. What's wrong with that? Well, the psychologists realize that this kind of mindset is actually playing a trick on our minds that we don't recognize. And the reason is that the most reason why people always want to put that they're a 7 is because, if I could just have a little more, then I would actually be a 10. Which is to say, we can always be happier. We can always have a better job. We can always have a better house. We can always have a better this and better that. Always better something. But what they also find is that if that's the way you look at the world, then you'll realize that you'll never actually get there. You're chasing something that can actually never be realized. Because you'll never ever give something attention. Did you notice when the good things happen, I said they get to an 8 or a 9? Why? Because you never ever want to give something a 10 because that's the max. Because then you've maxed out and apparently that's a bad thing. So you always give it an 8 or 9 because you want to leave open the option that something might be a 10. And what Jesus is trying to say to us in the end is that in his kingdom, this couldn't be further from the truth. Because in Jesus, in his kingdom, at his dinner party, at his feast, we have everything we could possibly need and more. Where your status and your identity is not based upon who you are, what you can do, what you've done, what you can offer, but indeed is because he is the one who loves us, cares for us, and sits with us, and feeds us, and loves us, and all those things. The one who invites the people with spiritual dropsy, but does it not to embarrass us, but to heal us. I mean, think about it. Jesus goes to this dinner party knowing, because he's Jesus, that they're there to set him up. He knows full well they want to kill him. But Jesus goes. Why? Because his going is the invitation. He's saying, I'm the one, even though you hate me, want to get rid of me, I'm the one coming to heal you of the very thing that you think is good for you, your hatred, your delusion, your things of me, and I'm coming to heal you in the only way that I can. Rich, poor, host, guest, it doesn't matter. All of you are invited. Why? Because you all need me, and yet I'm coming to you. And the question you got to ask is, does anyone love like that? Does anyone think like that? Does anyone invite and welcome sinners, heal them to wholeness and fullness, but not just in an office somewhere, but at a feast of grace like that? Knowing that when he does, he'll be killed, and then realizing that when he's killed, he gives you even more love, the love you didn't even know you needed, which then gives you, as we sung, eternal salvation. Church, the longer you search, you'll never find that there's a God who will do what Jesus does, who invites you to his dinner party, not because you matter, not because you can give him anything, but he invites you because you need him to heal you, but you don't even know it. And the question as we finish is simply this. Do you see that the most scandalous thing in and through all the parables is a God who simply loves in a way that no one else does, who thinks of you in a way that no one else will, who then will do for you what no one else can? And if you, by his Spirit, see, then the question that I want to ask to you today is, will you accept his invitation? But before you answer that question, let me tell you this. Because we suffer from dropsy, you won't ever accept this invitation unless you are readily willing to admit that the only reason why you got the invitation is because you and I are the poor, the lame, the blind, and the crippled. But here's the beauty. At this dinner party, do you know who went away really happy, singing praises? The diseased dropsy man who got healed. Everyone else was angry, confused, or both. So church, will you respond to Jesus' invitation today? Will you say yes to him when he invites you, laying yourself down, knowing who we are, but also knowing what Jesus thinks of us and therefore says we actually are? And if indeed you are willing, let me suggest 2 ways you respond to him, and then we'll finish. First, won't you extend the invitation that Jesus has given to you by extending it onto others? Yes, you can invite your neighbors to literally a meal at your house. But if that sounds weird to you because you don't know them and so on and so forth, then won't you invite people to our house, this place in a party, a feast, a worship, and then actual food after, where you can then bless them with the same invitation that Jesus has given to you. And then second, and most important, will you respond to him by asking him to heal you? Dropsy is dangerous because the very nature of it is, though it's killing you, you think the thing that's killing you is the thing that you need to become better. And so won't you ask him to open your eyes? Ask him, Jesus, what do I need to be released of, freed from, so I can get out of that well and be fully alive in your kingdom? What do I need to be released from so that I can enjoy the meal at your dinner table, at your kingdom feast, and therefore know that I'm loved, that I'm saved, that I'm known, and somehow by your grace, I'm good. And as you do, then will you enjoy the feast unlike any other, reveling in His grace and therefore being transformed to live all the more. Take some time and ask, Lord, will you heal me of this dropsy? I want to be free. And as you do, then as you walk out these doors, then go and celebrate by inviting everyone else who needs to be freed just like we do. Take some time.